You're listening to the Microsoft Innovation Podcast, where we explore the intersection of people, business, and technology. This year, we're adding a new show to our lineup, The AI Advantage, to help you learn the skills you need to thrive in the AI era.
Welcome to the MVP Show. My intention is that you listen to the stories of these MVP guests and are inspired to become an MVP and bring value to the world through your skills. If you have not checked it out already, I do a YouTube series called How to Become an MVP. The link is in the show notes. With that, let's get on with the show. Welcome back to the Microsoft Innovation Podcast. Today, our guest is from Copenhagen. And he's not only talking about AI, he's actually involved in implementing it across organizations on a day-by-day basis. So welcome to the show, Bo. He scales Copilot across teams and designs AI that actually fits real users. This conversation is packed with insights you won't actually find in a product demo. Full links are in the show notes for the episode as always. Bo, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Mark, and pleasure to be here.
Good to have you on. You have a lovely country, and I always like to start with getting to know you. So let's start with food, family, and fun. What do they mean to you?
Oh, so I'm a huge foodie and love both making food for myself and go out and eat. I mean, with the next step, which is family with two small kids, it's not that much anymore, but definitely cooking a lot in my home. Love Italian and South American cuisine. So doing a lot of that. And then I have my wife and two sons on 5 years and 5 months. So busy home. busy home. That is so cool. So tell us about your specialty. Am I right in thinking Copilot is one of the key AI tools that you work with on a day-to-day basis? Yeah, the Copilot is the core of what I'm doing. I come from a Microsoft 365 background, or actually back to when it was SharePoint 2010, and worked my way through Office 365, Microsoft 365, and that entire stack, and now mainly focused on Copilot for Microsoft 365, but also doing some agents, doing a lot of other AI-related stuff. All of it sort of fills together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How did you get involved in AI and why AI at this time where, prior to that, I assume you're heavy in the document automation side of things, maybe Microsoft Teams. What's made you pivot and go deeper into the AI space?
So it's actually funny. I got hired into my current company, Delegate, a couple of months prior to Copilot being released by Microsoft. I was hired in to do document collaboration platforms, contract platforms, doing security compliance stuff with the Purview platform as well, because I've done a lot of that. I've always tried to sort of bridge the security and compliance side of things with the employee experience, which of course they clash once in a while, and trying to find that good bridge. And then a couple of months into that role, took on a couple of the first customers, then Copilot was there. And I had a little spare time to start digging into that and found it sort of exciting, that new revolution. I had worked with ChatGPT quite a while before that, just more personal and sort of in my private productivity. So the pivot to Copilot was quite easy. And of course, it wasn't a dance in the start because Copilot was quite immature. But I love finding those. So how can we actually use it at the stage it is now? And how can we see it evolve through the years on becoming more and more of a productivity booster?
Yeah, that's interesting because, a lot of people would say there's been a lot of hype around AI. And I like your context there of, right, what can I do with it in its current form? And so when you had those conversations with people, how do you answer that? How do you answer, one, is it just hype, or is it a actual practical tool that we're all going to end up, making? It's going to be a critical tool that we use every day. Kind of like, Outlook is one of those tools that you can't really in the business world live without an email client, right? As for communications, and even nowadays in a more disconnected workforce, you would say Microsoft Teams with the video conferencing capability. That's probably also one of those indispensable tools. Everything else you could probably live without and still do business. But is Copilot moving into that space?
Yeah, I think more and more, and I think there's still a lot of hype. There's still, of course, a lot of the Microsoft marketing going on about what can we do in 6-12 months, and I try to keep it on the side of what can we actually do now. And I feel it has pivoted over to something we can actually use as a day-to-day tool. It's still sort of my personal productivity, but it helps a lot. I had the sort of revelation a couple of months ago when Copilot was down for half a day. I was at the point now where I didn't really realize how much I use it, but when it's gone, I realize how much I use it just with Outlook, Teams, any other of these tools that they're not something we talk a lot about because they're just there. And I feel it's the same with Copilot. And of course, the adoption rate is not massive yet still with Copilot. So there are a lot of people who haven't reached that point. But for the first movers and the people who are there and have been onboarded in the past 6 months, then I believe it's starting to get to that point.
So what's your day-to-day role? Are you helping companies with their Copilot implementation? What do you actually do?
So I do a lot of different things. I do training programs for companies where we specialize the trainings on how can Copilot help you. I worked a lot in the banking industry in Denmark. So how can we help financial advisors? How can we help the back office with using Copilot in their work processes? So that's a lot of what I'm doing. But then I also take some of my history with me. So I'm also doing compliance checks, technical checks. Are your platform actually ready for Copilot? Because there's a lot of things there. And are your legal team and your compliance policies ready for Copilot? Because that's one of the massive blockers is that many companies don't have data governance at a level they want to start using AI and even to just work day to day. We need to improve that a lot and get the compliance experts, CISOs, to understand what is Copilot bringing to the table and why should we think compliance now. So I'm using that as a massive driver for doing those kind of projects I would have loved to do a year ago, but where it was hard to find funding from the C level, sort of the Purview project, the SharePoint Advanced Management, and now we have that urgency to do that.
The EU AI Act, does that carry any implications, particularly for Copilot? Let's not go broadly into other areas of AI, but let's just stick within, when you think about the EU AI Act and what you would know about it in the context of the, let's just call it the $30 SKU, the M365 Copilot SKU. What do you think about that? And when you're talking about things like compliance and using that tool, how do those two things marry up for you?
I think they're actually working quite well together because what the EU AI Act identifies as high impact scenarios and those very critical scenarios, that's not something we would do with the M365 Copilot. That's something we would do with Azure Foundry or maybe agents, but what's in the normal Copilot, if you will, that doesn't really cross that line of where it has huge compliance implications regarding the AI Act. There were one thing with these Teams meeting recordings where you had that emotional interpretation. So what does Mark think about this podcast episode? It could do that, but now Microsoft was actually quick to allow admins to turn that on and off for the companies to decide for themselves. But as we speak, we still haven't seen EU's final, so this is what you actually need to adhere to. It should have been there in June already and May already, I believe. So when we see that, of course, that will tell us a lot more. But what we see from the digital data agencies in the governments, both in Denmark and in Norway, is their strict focus is on data governance. Because where we see the biggest risk and where they see the biggest risk with Copilot is if you have broadly shared documents in your own tenant. So it's not exposing customer data outside. It is exposing somebody's payroll information to the entire company.
So part of the EU AI Act is there's an education component that if you're going to implement AI inside your organization, you need to have trained your staff effectively on the AI tools. Does this apply to Copilot in your mind?
It does, yeah. So Copilot is a generative AI tool, and it should follow the same rules and regulations. And also, why I presume I'll have a lot more to do once that really comes into play, because we need to upskill the entire country. And Denmark is heavily reliant on Microsoft for most of our major companies and most of our public sector. And we need to train all those people in using AI. Yeah.
It's funny you say that. I smile because one of your politicians in the last 2 weeks has come out publicly saying that they're getting rid of the Office Productivity Suite out of that organization, and they didn't indicate that they're going to Google Workspace, so therefore I can only assume they're going to some no-name tool for office productivity. I think it might have the opposite effect of productivity. Is it just electioneering, politician, type posturing, or like, are they seriously going to go back into the dark ages of document creation?
I really don't think so, because we are so heavily bound into the Microsoft stack that if we want to remove our entire productivity suite, it's identity management, it's security, it's device, it's everything. That would be a massive project. It would take, tens of years. It would cost billions of kroners. So I think it would be very, very ambitious to undertake, and I haven't seen any other state the same other than this one politician. I know some people are looking at some German states where they are running open source, but I also think there is a big difference of where we are coming from in those states in Germany and in Denmark on our digitalization and what our entire core is built on. I think it's a good idea, of course, that Denmark should be more conscious when we build new stuff, when we buy new stuff. Where do we buy that? But let's start there and not change the entire stack.
Yeah. Let's just head back to the training side of things, and we touched on there in regards to the EU AI Act, and you're doing a lot of training. Is the type of training you're doing people that have never used it? They might have heard about AI in the media, and they are like ground zero. They've not written a prompt. They are or are you dealing with people more that they're wanting to go to the next level of skill set development?
So I'm doing both and actually enjoying doing both. I just did a series of trainings where I had 8 training sessions for a company and was starting from scratch. They hadn't used ChatGPT or any other AI tools in their workday. So we started from scratch. And I find that those are very, very important, because Copilot is not necessarily an intuitive tool. It's a completely different way of working. And just having 5 different Copilot buttons in the same screen is sort of, where do I do what? And also expectation management, because we all read on LinkedIn about all the amazing things that AI is doing, and we need to be able to do all of this. So expectation management and telling, so what is it actually you can do with it? I often use Copilot and PowerPoint as the example, because if you're going into Copilot and PowerPoint with your just expectations of what would an AI do in PowerPoint, then you're getting massively disappointed in that, because that's not what Copilot and PowerPoint do. But if you turn it around and actually, what is Copilot then capable of doing in PowerPoint? It's capable of doing the first 80% of your presentation, not the last 20, which is what people would expect. It would be reversed, actually. But pulling in all the information, doing a proper sort of narrative through the presentation, all those kind of things, that's what it's good at. So having that expectation management is really important in there, and what I spend a lot of time when I deal with new Copilot users. But then on the other hand, I also have the ones that have worked heavily with ChatGPT, worked heavily with other tools, or just used Copilot from the start back in November 2023, I think. And there we can delve into something else, because the new users, that will mostly be sort of app-based or simple workflows. And here we can then go into, so please bring one of your more complex processes to me, and then we'll work through that together, figure out how do we tie the different copilots together, because that's sort of the next level. First is getting to understand what can the different copilots do in each app, and then how do I work with something in Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat. Now I need to move it over to Word. How do I do that? And then I need to make that as a presentation, and sort of that entire process life cycle, going through that. That's really exciting to work with some of the more experienced users on.
When you're training the first time users, are you starting more in the chat experience? And so, the M365 chat Copilot experience, or sorry, let me just clarify there. I don't mean the non-$30 SKU. I mean, you're in M365 Copilot. You might be accessing it from within Teams, or you might be accessing it, directly from the web browser, where you have things like search, chat, the various agents that are available to you, pages, notebooks, etc. Do you start people there before you jump into, hey, let's look at let's look at Copilot in the context of Outlook or Word or PowerPoint or Excel? Where do you kind of start that training journey for folks?
So that's one of the only things in the timeline I insist on, is starting with chat, because it gives that simple interaction with generative AI. It's how I learned it back when ChatGPT came out, was that very simple text-based interface. I didn't have to mind if it created the right slides or the right pictures, or if it formatted my email correctly or anything like that. I just had that text to the LLM and text back. So it's a very easy way to start working with it. And it's also where I find some of the easy productivity tools are sort of help me summarize this project, help me work with this. But when you then mention something like the agents, like the analyst agent or the researcher agent, I actually pull them out and move them to the back of the line, because it often confuses people more than it helps them work with the Copilot chat. And the same with Loop or Copilot pages, with notebooks. I still find that for people who don't use Loop, that then it's another layer I need to understand. It's another complexity. So also moving that a little down the line when people get that grasp of just using the LLM on my company data.
That's interesting, because, Loop, I feel, is almost growing up with Copilot and has become a thing because of Copilot, even though I use Loop massively in its own right now. Things that I would have done in OneNote in the past, I've stopped using OneNote entirely, and I've in fact transferred a lot of what was in OneNote into Loop. In fact, I've just finished writing a book for Microsoft Press, and I wrote that entire book in Loop, all the chapters, all the breakdowns, because it's so easy to manage, right? And from an editing perspective, it was much easier in that you're not worrying about, for example, word formatting, where most people probably would write a book in Word. Loop was the product of choice. Are you then finding that you're having to sometimes level set on some of the other Microsoft products, because people are like, wow, is this what you can do with Copilot? And you're like, actually, that's just a function of Loop, or that's just a function of Forms or something like that.
Yeah. Actually, anytime I go into that, if it's not just pure training, if it's sort of more an adoption project I have with the client, I start with a maturity assessment to figure out where are they on this track. And that has several pillars to figure out, both where are they with AI, have they worked with AI already, but that's also where are they with the Microsoft 365 stack, because I've actually met companies who don't use Teams. And then, the whole meeting experience with Copilot, that's very confusing when you have to understand Teams first. So we need to get that out of the way and deal with those kind of things. And the same I found that companies, because I had a very naive approach on to the start with, that everybody needed these Copilot or AI communities, because we just see that's where you get the fastest adoption and the most efficient adoption. If you can grow a good community with the tech influencers in there that will post about their learnings, I was sort of telling all customers, you need to have this. But I just found that some corporations don't have a culture for that. It's impossible to build that culture. So that came into our maturity assessment, figuring out, do we build a community? Can you actually do that in this company? Or do we do something else? Do we leverage town halls for getting those tech champions up and speak? Or do we do something else? So figuring out where your organization are before rolling Copilot out has a massive impact on the project.
You talked about maturity assessment there, and a couple of weeks ago I was with a bunch of educators in the country I am in, and we're talking about Copilot, and I talked about maturity assessment, but what I didn't expect is that maturity around something like Copilot doesn't only differ from how the C-level in the organization understand their level of maturity. It differs at a department level, and then it differs at an individual level. So I'm finding you can't just have a few key people fill out the maturity assessment, because you're only getting part of the picture for an organization. So when you go to run out maturity assessments, are you doing it at the individual level, at the team level, at the department level? Like, how do you think about if you want to capture a good snapshot of where your starting point and how to move forward? What do you do?
So it depends a lot on which part of the maturity I'm trying to assess. If it's something like how do we train and how do we build communities around new tech, then I'll try to find the project managers that have done this kind of work before in the organization. Right now we have still a lot of those project managers that ran the Teams rollout during COVID-19. I mean, they know what works and what doesn't work in their organization for community and training. When we look at the AI maturity, we might want to send out surveys to actually have a more broad picture of where are the different employees in the organization. And then we try to get interviews with somebody from each department or from each division in the company to tell us about where are they on the processes. Do they actually have defined processes they can work with on Copilot? And I found that there, if I can get sort of a personal assistant to the department head, or if I can get one of these people that everybody will go ask for anything, they have a really good foot on the ground. They understand their department, and those are the ones who can answer truthfully on their department. And I also insist on not having any management present there. I don't want anybody from the central organization there, because they need to just be able to speak freely, saying, well, we are not that mature in our IT. We don't know how to get these tools. And then on the training, I do always assume when I do that basic training that the users don't know anything about Copilot. So I start from scratch, because I found that the ones who then actually do understand it, they will just clap themselves on the shoulder thinking, well, I already knew that. But if I do it the other way around, then the ones who don't understand it will just sit with that massive frustration.
Yes. Yeah. Very interesting. I see we've consumed all our time, but just another question. When running your maturity assessments, are you just sitting down and doing a Q&A session with people, or are you rolling out a formal, a form type thing that you get them to fill out and then, review their results? How do you physically do this?
So for the departmental assessment, then I will send them an email in advance. These are the things I'm going to ask you. These are the things I expect you can answer. And then I'll sit down in an interview with them to figure out what are they answering, and then dig into that, because most often their answers are, we need to get a few levels deeper in that.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Okay, before I let you go, what's the most recent thing you've learned in your use of Copilot personally, like that you find like, wow, that is so beneficial to me, not to your colleagues or your customers, but to you?
I'll give you 2 examples because I have. So first one was, and it's a silly one, but in PowerPoint, I found that I needed to do spell check because I don't spell that well and I make grammar errors. So I actually just asked Copilot in the side panel, can you find all spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes throughout this presentation? And it just listed all the slides, what I needed to change, the change I needed to do, and I could just go step by step through that. It helped a lot on assessing that. I felt a lack of that button that said, well, go do. But I hope that will come at some point. Yeah. And then I started playing with notebooks a lot now. And though I feel they're not there yet, they are not fully mature, there are some levels that are just lacking. I still find that it's almost like creating a small agent, but very easily. So it's only grounded on whatever I put into that notebook, and I can ask based on that. So doing that and actually starting with the researcher agent. So I worked on a new strategy set a couple of weeks ago, and I started with the researcher agent, turned that answer into a Copilot page, and then put that page with all of the other supporting materials into the notebook, and then I could work iteratively towards that strategy. And that was amazing to work with. So if I can get these other tools, if I can get the researcher agent into Notebook, if I can get a sort of centralized, I really want Notebook to have, this is the one document I'm actually working on. This is the core, this is where I will fill in information, and just have that at glance. Then I'll be really happy because I feel there's a huge power in notebooks.
I love it. Bo, it's been so good talking to you. I feel like I've learned so much and drank from a fire hose in your wisdom and insight. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot, Mark. It was a huge pleasure.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If you like the show and want to be a supporter, check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. Thanks again, and see you next time.
Are you ready to accelerate your career in the Microsoft ecosystem? The 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, created by Mark Smith, is your opportunity to create a personalized pathway to success. Join over 1,200 alumni from more than 70 countries who have achieved remarkable results, from promotions to new job opportunities. Take it from Nathan, who said, "Since completing the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, I've become an MVP in business applications and doubled my income." Or from Parves, who shares, "I've never felt as inspired or energized about my career as I do now." Sign up at arcor.nz365guy.com. You can find the link in the show notes. And if you use the code podcast, you'll get 10% off.